Hello once again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Tuesday's edition of Alaska Weather on the first day of February 2022. I'm David Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. I'll be hosting today's show once again. Up first, hazardous weather graphic. We've got winter weather advisories for the Koyukuk Valley on down into Tanana and part of the upper Yukon Valley, but wind chill advisories actually for the Yukon Flats down into Eagle, upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country for wind chills of 45 to 55 below zero for tonight through tomorrow, and then winter weather advisories for snow and blowing snow for the central interior there, Bettles down to Tanana. Otherwise, out to the west, winter weather advisory for St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait coast tonight through tomorrow for some blowing snow, gusty winds, creating visibility is reduced down to about half-mile or less. Not blizzard conditions, but the blowing snow will reduce the visibilities there. And then a wind advisory out for the lower Yukon River Valley area for winds gusting to 50 miles an hour. And then winter weather advisories out for the Yukon Delta, Yukon Kuskokwim Delta, and Bristol Bay for tonight into tomorrow for snow, several inches with gusty winds, again creating visibilities down to a half-mile or less. And a winter weather advisory out until 9 p.m. this evening, I believe, for the Kenai Peninsula there, western Kenai Peninsula and up into Anchorage for 3 to 6 inches of snow total. Again, beginning to improve and tapering off a little this evening. Down to the south, the red area there, that's a heavy snow warning out for the eastern North Gulf Coast around Yakutat, much of the central northern panhandle for tonight tonight and tomorrow, Wednesday. For 6 to 12 inches of snow possibly falling in those areas. Best chance would be, of course, Juneau on up to the north there and over toward Yakutat. Then the yellow shaded areas are snow advisories for anywhere from 3 to 6 inches of snow, Metlakatla, Ketchikan, Craig Klawak, possibly Sitka, and those places. Could be a little bit more than that over towards Stewart and Hyder in the Misty Fjords area, but right now advisory looks like it'll cover it pretty good. And moving on to satellite imagery, you can see the band of clouds coming northward into southern Alaska, bringing the warmer temperatures and the moderate to heavy snow falling across the Kenai Peninsula up into the Anchorage area today, into Portage. Winds gusting upwards of 50 miles an hour there with a quarter-mile or less visibility in snow and blowing snow. This brought about a little over an inch of water equivalent precipitation at Kodiak Island in the last 24 hours. Much of that falling as wet snow before changing over just plain rain late this morning and continuing into the afternoon. Starting to let up a little bit now with the front pushing eastward. And precipitation on the increase along the north coast of the Panhandle and the eastern North Gulf Coast, with areas of lighter precipitation back westward into the southwest interior. But some pretty gusty winds ahead of this system there with, the Kenai Peninsula, around Kenai, on the Kenai Peninsula, seeing northeast winds gusting 30 to 35 miles an hour into Kiski and Kenai, lighter at Soldotna. And Middleton Island ahead of that front, seeing winds gusting 50 miles an hour. That's good for gale warnings. And Kaliganik over northern Bristol Bay, seeing east winds gusting to 47 miles an hour, and again they were carrying a quarter-mile visibility and blowing snow and heavy snow there. And you can see the snow pushing in across the southwest part of the state, and clouds on the increase into the central interior, but the northern areas seeing some winds, higher elevations, 30 to 40 mile an hour wind gusts there, say above 1 to 2,000 feet. And then light winds over the north slope, especially the east side and the northeast side under the ridge axis there. Kind of an unsettled day, Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians. Not too bad, though. Winds on the light side. Next system starting to bring the increase in the wind and rain. And that's a pretty good low center. Pulls up to near Adak tonight. So probably see storm force winds around that center, especially on the eastern quadrant there over toward Atka. and trying to get in toward Nikolsky, but winds will actually diminish once the front pushes through. Be a windy, wet night for the Alaska Peninsula. A little more in the way of occasional showers for Kodiak Island, or maybe even becoming pretty intermittent and scattered in nature. If they possibly could end altogether, winds will become light. Low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, definitely lighter winds there. A little breezy over the Copper River Basin. And again, where the wind advisories are out over the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country. It looks pretty breezy up over the Noatak Valley to the western Arctic coast, western Brooks Range as well, that tight gradient, and then the heavy snow moving into the northern Panhandle and North Gulf Coast. May start to mix with rain at sea level right along the outer coastline late tonight and into tomorrow, but precipitation amounts won't end. The rate will decrease and won't be as heavy late tomorrow afternoon. But look for a fair amount of snow to come into the Panhandle, northern and central areas, as well as the North Gulf Coast. Snow tapering off northern Cook Inlet. Still a chance of snow showers over the Kenai Peninsula. Blowing snow, still a possibility up along the Alaska Range there with windy conditions, but dry and mostly clear, and continued quite cold over the northern interior with temperatures staying well below zero in the lighter wind areas in the North Slope. On out to the Arctic coast, and wind, rain, and snow in store for the Aleutian southern Bering Sea. And then on Thursday, next front pushes up, so wind, rain increase along the southeast coast and North Gulf Coast once again, snow at higher elevations and snow inland areas. You see quite a band of snow across southern Alaska there, snow and blowing snow, again the Alaska Range, possibly into the Tanana Valley, might even catch the Fairbanks area this time. A little bit of new snow possible there, but staying dry back toward the Galena area, or the mid-Yukon River Valley. Seward Peninsula staying dry but quite windy up into the Koyukuk Valley, North Slope Arctic coast, cold and dry with lighter winds there. And snow showers pretty widespread out over the western Aleutians, with that low just to the west of Shimei and Attu, but break over the eastern Aleutians could result in a partly to mostly sunny dry day for Unalaska to False Pass, possibly King Cove, and then pick up the snow showers over toward Cold Bay to Port Hayden and Sand Point. Lows tonight, 25 to 45 below. Coldest again Northway or from Eagle up into the Yukon Flats. Otherwise 20 to 30 below for the North Slope and the Arctic coast. With the Alaska Peninsula, lows in the 30s and lower 30s for the central western, all of the Aleutians. Pribilofs low about 30, low 5 for St. Lawrence Island. Mid-teens northern Panhandle, lower 20s around the Juneau area to lower 30s all the way down to Dixon Entrance. And a shade below zero in the Copper River Basin, followed by highs a shade above zero for Gulkana tomorrow. Staying below zero north of the Alaska Range, and 0 to 5 for the highs in the Kuskokwim Valley, 30 to 35 down toward Bristol Bay, and in the lower 40s for the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, up above the frost point for the Pribilofs in the mid-30s there, and lower teens St. Lawrence Island. And for the Panhandle, mid-20s in the north, 25 to 30 for the highs north, to lower 40s down toward the south and over toward Sitka. Lows on to Thursday morning, staying well below zero up in the interior north of the Alaska Range there. Mid-teens, Susitna Valley, upper teens to mid-20s for the lows for the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound. Mid-30s over Kodiak Island for the overnight lows. And near 40 for the low along the coast of the Panhandle, otherwise 25 to 35 basically. And again, Eagle pushing down toward 50 below over toward the eastern interior there, with 35 to 45 degree below zero temperatures likely for the Yukon Flats on up toward Arctic Village, maybe even the North Slope. And for high temperatures, Thursday afternoon, 15 to 25 below or so, maybe closer to 30 below for the highs on the North Slope there, but milder out over toward the Arctic coast. And 0 to 5 below for the highs. Central interior, Tanana Valley, and out toward Galena, maybe 1 above 0, 5 for the northern Kuskokwim Valley, lower to mid-teens toward Sleep Mute, and upper teens out toward Bethel and the southwest coast. 30 for the highs for the Pribilofs, and upper 30s for the Aleutians, lower 40s along areas of the Alaska Peninsula. Call it 42 for the high in Kodiak. And mid to upper 20s, the Susitna, Manuska Valley, Kenai Peninsula, Anchorage area, Eagle River, and even the Copper River Basin getting above zero a little ways. That's 7 at Gulkana, 28 at Valdez. Look at the mid-40s over the central and southern southeast coast, right around freezing up toward Haines and Skagway.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, some good VFR along the central part of the state, St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait eastward along the Yukon River, right down to the Alaska Range and up to the Brooks Range. Eastern North Slope Arctic Coast, some marginal VFR. Then some IFR, Yukon Delta Coast, and a narrow band extending in from the Bering Sea there right up to the Alaska Range across northern Kuskokwim Valley. And also more IFR, Copper River Basin, especially the central and east side. Marginal VFR across the remainder of southern Alaska. IFR from about Cordova right on down across the entire Panhandle, as well as the Pribilof, central western Aleutians, Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. All IFR for the afternoon. IFR from southern Kodiak Island, actually Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands down across Kodiak, Alaska Peninsula. More IFR, Atka westward, Shimei and Attu, much of the southwest Bering as well. Some VFR near the Pribilofs on Alaska Island and just to the east, and marginal VFR, southern Alaska, VFR, north central part of the state. And then the Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast, marginal VFR with IFR over on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and still some lingering IFR, northern Lynn Canal, northern Glacier Bay over to Yakutat, as well as over toward Misty Fjords to Stewart. And then for Thursday morning, areas of IFR, southern Panhandle, mostly marginal for the northern southeast coast, areas of IFR along the North Gulf Coast and the eastern Alaska Range, a little more solid area around Kodiak Island on up into Cook Inlet, and then Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay to Nunivak Island, down across the Pribilofs, so all IFR. And eastern Beaufort Sea coast continues with the IFR there, but better conditions to the western coast, VFR. That holds down across Seward Peninsula through Thursday afternoon. That zone of IFR stays put there, St. Lawrence Island, right along the Yukon River to the eastern Brooks Range, improving. Got marginal VFR in areas of the central eastern Arctic coast. Solid IFR for the Panhandle, Gulf of Alaska, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, into Cook Inlet, northward along and to the east of the Alaska Range, and then cutting across the mountains there into the Upper Tanana Valley area, 40-mile country with marginal VFR up to about Eagle, northern Bering Sea, IFR, southern Bering and Aleutian, marginal. And Atuvik looks pretty marginal as well as Adigan. In fact, the Alaska Range even looking marginal throughout the day on Wednesday. Lake Clark, Merrill, rainy, windy, all looking marginal most of the day. Isabel, same forecast, marginal VFR. And Mintesta, marginal VFR. Tanita, marginal VFR. And Portage looking pretty marginal. Chilkoot and White, though, IFR, trying to improve to marginal VFR in the afternoon, but may not quite make it up toward the two passes there. And for the freezing levels at the surface tomorrow morning, northward, into the central Copper River Basin, or at least on the north side of the Coast Range there, northern Cook Inlet down into Togiak Bay, and definitely north of the Pribilofs, just south of St. Matthew Island, and over the eastern border of the Panhandle, 2,000 to 4,000 feet there, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island. Icing, areas of light to isolated moderate over the southeast coast, and maybe a better chance of some moderate icing coming up from the south there for the Alaska Peninsula. And onto the jet stream, southerly flow, upper low over the western Aleutians, and an upper high there just south of the Gulf, so south to southwest, 80 to 100 knots there into the Kuskokwim Bay area, and then west-northwest, 110 over the southeast interior, increased to about 120 knots east of southeast Alaska. 9,000 feet, colder north to northeast flow over the northern half of the state, and then warmer southerly flow, 50 knots coming up across the Alaska Peninsula. Westerlies 45 knots in the Panhandle, 70 knot winds ahead of that low out in the Bering Sea there. Actually at 3,000 feet, sitting just north of Amchitka Island with 55 to 65 knot winds there in the eastern and northeast quadrant, and 45 to 55 knot winds blowing across the Alaska Peninsula, east 60 knots there, entering Norton Sound, and a pretty windy area there from the central interior to St. Lawrence Island, west 35 there for the Gulf. Look for considerable moderate chop up over the western Brooks Range along mountain areas, as well as the Seward Peninsula, Kobuk Valley, into the Koyukuk Valley to the Yukon Flats. And for the Aleutian, Alaska Peninsula, occasional moderate chop. You can blow about 4,000 to 6,000 feet. And same thing for Adak, Atka, and Amchitka, as well as the southern southeast coast. After the break, I'll be back with the marine forecasts.
Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service, and joining us today, two more people to talk about the augmented reality sandbox. It's Alana Valaji. She's a University of Alaska Fairbanks mechanical engineering student, helped design and work on the details to make this new type of sandbox there. Thanks for joining us, Alana. Thanks. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator for AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. It's a program funded nationally by the National Science Foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Alana, tell us about how you changed and adapted this version of the augmented reality sandbox. It's a really cool tool.
So Juno approached us with 3 goals for this new version of the sandbox. They wanted it to be compact in a light system that could travel around the state. They wanted it to be child-oriented, so we designed the sandbox to have 3 different levels.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. You can have younger children, you can have high school kids. I guess I should say high school teenagers.
Sure.
And then we also designed it to be more marketable, user-friendly, so that this could be seen eventually in classrooms all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And you had a big hand in this, but this was a team approach, right?
Definitely. It was a really good experience for myself, for George Stevens, who we'll see later.
One of our hand models today. Yeah.
For 2 other members who aren't here today, Cody Klingman and Austin Hunt. And it was just a really good learning experience all around.
Very good. And this is something that is part of your learning experience as well, so you get to check a box in your education.
Yeah,
right?
it's a requirement for seniors of mechanical engineering at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Very good. Very good. Well, it is a wonderfully inquisitive tool, fun to play with, and I hope to get my hands in the sand here in just a little bit. But it's also part of a bigger program, something that we were talking about a moment ago, AKwx, and that's what Courtney is here to tell us more about. What is AKwx, and why do you need a sandbox?
Well, AKwx, as you mentioned, is a national program. We're funded nationally, but we're actually located statewide. We're at UAF, we're at UAA, we're in Southeast at UAS. And she mentioned, you know, taking the sandbox as an educational tool, and that's where I'm an outreach coordinator for the South Central test case.
Okay.
Our focus is on the Kenai watershed, and we are really interested in using these tools like the sandbox to interact with the students down there and get them interested in STEM and also communicate the research findings that we've been having throughout the state.
Okay. And one of those, as George and Eric are kind of changing the contours for us there from UAF to maybe something that resembles a little bit of something more of the Kenai watershed, which is one of your focuses for the study, right? And specifically looking at some of the changes there and how that impacts people and also the salmon.
Yes, it is all of our research is social and environmental.
Okay.
So we have social scientists working hand in hand with our environmental scientists. One of the things we're studying is Upper Russian Lake, and we have a researcher taking sediment cores from that lake. So one of the things we're going to use the sandbox to communicate is how the landscape changed over a long period of time, thousands of years, going from glacier, covered by glacier ice, to being filled with water. And then
that's what they're doing right now.
Exactly. So
live.
So they're moving the
cool.
water around. And then I think they've got some props over there, because we're also going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how the salmon got there.
Okay.
So using
and there's
these,
the salmon.
Exactly. Oh, I think there's a few more.
Yeah, we like more salmon in Alaska. More salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really taking the findings from our research grant and just trying to connect with the community and translate it in a really hands-on and exciting way, so people can, you know, interact with us as much as possible.
Well, sure. That makes the learning and the science real and quite literally in your face, rather than just some boring black and white paper that you have to read about. This is something that people can understand better because it's visual and they're touching and feeling and seeing these changes, right?
Yeah, and get them engaged. And then outreach is a huge component, and working with the younger students, and actually even, I mean, working with the UAF graduate and engineering students it's a huge part of our grant, and we really enjoy it.
Oh, it is wonderfully exciting. And so, Alana, you were telling us that this is built to travel.
Right.
And this is built to do more things than version 1. Where can this type of project go in Alaska? And what can it demonstrate?
I mean, we were hoping to eventually get to villages that were harder to reach, that you couldn't necessarily move a whole fixed instrument to, right?
Right.
You need something that can pack up, fit in your truck bed. I mean, one of the most attractive parts of this project is that this was going to be something that was used past our graduation point. You know, this is going to be something that lives in the state for years.
Right, right. Well, it looks like you're well on your way with that. So what are, give me another example. What else can this show us? We've talked about the Kenai River watershed. What's the coolest thing that you've played in the sand with? What's your idea?
Well, I definitely enjoy the props, but we also like kind of building up a giant mound, and if you put some water behind it, you can make a little runway, I guess, and you know, demonstrate the effects of the hydrology by just putting up a dam and letting it all pour right down. And so that could, I think you mentioned it earlier, you could even demonstrate the effects of a tsunami.
Right.
Or something along those lines.
So it's not just topography, but it's also hydrology and coastal surge mapping and some of the coastal changes that we're seeing here in Alaska, and seeing what the smaller changes in the sandbox might do to kind of a real effect of a slosh or a push of water up on the coast. Tsunami inundation mapping, or even glacial dam release, as some has been demonstrated before. So wow, that's just an impressive thing. That it seems like the possibilities are nearly endless with this, and probably even more ideas that are popping up in your head too.
Yeah, as we speak.
Very cool. All right. Well, if folks want to get more information about EPSCoR, you guys are online. You're on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. AKwx, right? EPSCoR, Alaska EPSCoR, that is. And again, you guys are funded by the National Science Foundation, so more to come from that, and a longer-term study there. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Congratulations on your hard work there. This is really fun. And for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and I'm going to go play in the sandbox there. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at coastal water forecast. Not too bad on the south coast. West-southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, but seas up to 12 feet. And then picking up to westerly 25 knots as you head up the coastline, and then swinging around to the east at 20, and then back to 25 over to just eastern North Gulf Coast. Lincoln Glacier Bay, northern interchannels, winds will be north on Wednesday at 20 knots. Stevens Passage, south winds 20 knots with some gale force gusts. And small craft advisories for Clarence Strait, southeast winds 25 knots. And moving on to the Thursday forecast. Gale warnings for Clarence Strait on Thursday, southeast winds 35 knots, seas up to 12 feet. Small craft advisory Stevens Passage, southeast at 25. Lynn Canal, north winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. And on the coast, mostly south or southeast winds, the outer coastline at 30 knots, seas running 14 to 17 feet. Prince William Sound, light northerlies tomorrow at 10 knots, seas down to 2 feet. Same thing for northern Cook Inlet, light north winds. But brisk wind advisories south of the Forelands for north winds 25 knots. And northeast 25 Kamishak Bay. Eastern North Gulf Coast, looking at small craft advisories, northeast winds 25 knots, seas 13 feet. Western North Gulf Coast, northerlies at about 20, and the Barren Islands only 15 knots from the northeast. Well, those will pick up on Thursday, looking at gale warnings for the North Gulf Coast, east-northeast 35 knots, Barren Islands east at 40 knots, seas at about 13 feet. Kamishak Bay, gale warnings, north winds 40 knots and 40 knot northerlies in the forecast for southern Cook Inlet with 12-foot seas. Small or brisk wind advisories, northern Cook Inlet, north winds 25 knots, and Prince William Sound northeast at 20. Kodiak Island, east-northeast 15 to 25 knots tomorrow, and east-southeast 30 knots from Sitkinak to Cape Sarachev there, Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. Bering Sea side, east winds 25 knots. Brisk wind advisories, Bristol Bay, east winds at 30 knots. Those swing around to the southwest and come down a little bit. Still small craft advisory level winds there for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay at 25 knots. And 30 knot winds, Castle Cape to Sitkinak. Kodiak Island, gale warnings. In the case of Shelikof Strait, winds will be north, sustained 35 knots, east side of the island, south at 35. And on Alaska Island, gale warning south to southeast 30 to 35 knots tomorrow. Unmak Island, storm warning. Atka Island, storm warning. South to southwest winds 50 knots, and then call it falling back to gales for Adak in the afternoon. Amchitka Island, northwest 35, and Kiskadashimia, winds will be northwest at 25 knots. And for Thursday, let's see, from Shimmy all the way to Atka, winds will be south 25 knots. Unmak Island, southeast 25 to 40 knots. Unalaska Island, south 25 to 40 knots. And for the southwest coast, east winds 30 knots. Gale warnings for the Pribilof Islands and St. Matthew Island for east-southeast winds 35 knots. Northeast 40-knot gales for St. Lawrence Island. And for the day on Thursday, gale warnings continue northeast at 40 knots. Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, and St. Matthew Island. Southwest 25 knots for the Pribilofs. Gale warnings for the Yukon Delta coast. Northeast winds 35 knots. South on Nunivak Island, winds will be south at 30. And for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, kind of a variable to north wind pattern, but pretty light, 10 knots or less. Northeast 20 knots, western Arctic coast, Cape Beaufort to Wales. Brisk wind advisories, northeast winds 30 knots. And for Thursday, west winds at 10 knots for the central coast, eastward to demarcation point. Western Arctic coast, brisk wind advisories, east winds 25 knots, and then northeast winds 30 knots from Cape Beaufort to Wales. And looking at tonight again, pretty light winds up along the Arctic coast and north slope there under a ridge of Arctic high pressure. Otherwise, breezy over the higher terrain of the interior, and look for some blowing snow over the Copper River Basin, and that'll be developing St. Lawrence Island, and snow across southern Alaska, possibly mixing with rain along the coastline, and changing to rain, or staying rain, Kodiak Island, and rain for the Alaska Peninsula. Look for strong winds with that low over the central Aleutians as it lifts northward and weakens. Winds will turn westerly and slowly come down. Snow across the southern third of the state, periods of, into the Panhandle, mixed rain and snow outer coastline, cold and windy in the north. And that continues in Thursday with the snow creeping a little farther.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.